The gravel crunched beneath Jessamy Thorne's boots as she walked away from Pemberton House. She did not run. She did not look back. She simply walked, her traveling cloak pulled tight against the autumn chill, her small leather satchel pressed against her hip like a shield. Behind her, candles still blazed in every window. Music still drifted from the ballroom, where 200 guests celebrated an engagement that no longer existed. Her engagement, her future, her carefully constructed life, collapsing like a house built on sand. The October wind bit through her cloak, but Jessamy barely felt it. She was too focused on putting one foot in front of the other, too determined to maintain the composure that had carried her through the last impossible hour. She had found the documents at 7:30. Aldrich had sent her to his study to fetch his pocket watch, a small errand before they rejoined the party. She'd opened the wrong drawer by accident, searching for the watch, and her fingers had brushed against papers that bore her name. Certification of lunacy. The words had blurred before her eyes. She'd read them twice, 3 times, certain she was misunderstanding. But the language was precise, clinical, devastating. Upon marriage, Aldrich Pemberton would assume control of his wife's inheritance, her estate in Wiltshire, her mother's jewelry, her father's shipping investments. And within 6 months, his wife would be committed to Thornhaven Asylum for treatment of feminine hysteria and delusions. The physician's signature was already in place. The asylum director's seal gleamed red as blood. Aldrich had planned everything. The courtship, the proposal, the wedding scheduled for December. All of it designed to gain legal control of her fortune before disposing of her in a madhouse where no one would believe her protests. Jessamy had stood in that study, holding proof of her own planned destruction, and felt something inside her turn to iron. She had not screamed. She had not confronted him. She had tucked the documents into her satchel, her only proof of what he'd planned, then walked calmly to the ballroom, found Aldrich laughing with his friends, and told him quietly that she could not marry him. "Excuse me?" His smile had faltered. "The engagement is ended. I wish you well." She had removed the ring from her finger and placed it in his palm. "Please extend my apologies to your mother for the disruption to her party." Then she had walked out. Through the stunned silence, past the whispered questions, down the grand staircase, and out into the night. Now the Pemberton estate was a glow of lights behind her, growing smaller with every step. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty. The nearest village was 8 miles away. She had no carriage, no escort, and perhaps 40 pounds in her satchel alongside the damning papers. She had nothing except the truth, her only evidence, and her own 2 feet. And Marjorie, her 17-year-old sister, safely tucked away at Harrington Academy in Bath, the only family Jessamy had left since their parents' deaths. Whatever happened tonight, Jessamy had to survive for her. What will you do now? The question circled her mind like a carrion bird. Aldrich would be furious. By morning, he would spin the story to his advantage. The unstable bride who fled in the night, overcome by nerves. The fortune-hunting orphan who showed her true colors. He would destroy her reputation before she could speak a word against him. And who would believe her? An unmarried woman with no family connections, accusing the son of Lord Pemberton of conspiracy to commit her to an asylum. She would be laughed out of every drawing room in England. The crunch of gravel was the only sound in the darkness. Jessamy's throat tightened, but she refused to cry. Crying solved nothing. Crying was what weak women did while powerful men decided their fates. She was 3 miles from Pemberton House when she heard the carriage. The rumble of wheels and hoofbeats came from behind her, moving fast. Jessamy stepped to the edge of the road, pressing herself against the hedgerow. Probably guests leaving early, or perhaps Aldrich had sent someone after her. Her fingers found the small knife in her satchel. She was not entirely without defenses. The carriage was black, gleaming even in the moonlight, pulled by 4 matched horses that moved like shadows. It should have passed her without slowing. It did not. The driver reined the horses to a stop directly beside her. The carriage door opened and a man's voice cut through the darkness. "Miss Thorne, I presume?" Jessamy's blood turned to ice. He knew her name. "Who's asking?" A figure emerged from the carriage, tall and broad-shouldered, his features sharp in the moonlight. Dark hair, darker eyes, a face that looked carved from granite and old secrets. Someone who's been waiting for a woman brave enough to walk away from Aldrich Pemberton. He extended a gloved hand. "My name is Theron Vane, and I believe we have enemies in common." Jessamy did not take his hand. She had learned, in the space of one evening, that trusting well-dressed men with smooth voices led to commitment papers and stolen fortunes. This one might be worse than Aldrich, or he might be her only chance of survival. She had no way of knowing which. "You've been watching the Pembertons," she said. It wasn't a question. "For 3 years." Theron Vane lowered his hand, unbothered by her refusal. "You're the 5th woman Aldrich has courted. The other 4 are either dead, institutionalized, or vanished entirely. Their fortunes, however, remain very much accounted for, in Pemberton family coffers." The words hit Jessamy like stones. 5th. She was the 5th. "You have proof of this?" "Pieces, fragments. Enough to know the pattern, not enough to break it." His eyes studied her with an intensity that felt like being read. "Until tonight. Until you. What makes me different?" "You walked away." Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. "The others didn't see the trap until it closed. You saw it and chose the road instead, even knowing you'd lose everything." He gestured toward the empty darkness stretching before her. "That road leads nowhere, Miss Thorne. No friends will shelter you after Aldrich finishes spreading his version of events. No solicitor will take your case against a family with the Pembertons' influence. By morning, you'll be the mad bride who fled her own engagement, and every door in England will close against you." Jessamy's jaw tightened. "You're telling me things I already know. I'm telling you that I can offer an alternative. Which is? My carriage, my protection, my resources." He paused. "My name, if it comes to that." The wind gusted, cutting through Jessamy's cloak. She was cold, she realized. Cold and exhausted and standing on a dark road with a stranger who claimed to be her salvation. Everything about this felt like another trap. "Why?" she asked. "What do you gain?" "Justice." The word was hard, unvarnished. "Aldrich Pemberton's father destroyed my family 15 years ago. A business deal that stripped my mother of her inheritance and drove my father to an early grave. I've spent every year since building the power to destroy them in return." Theron's voice remained controlled, but Jessamy heard the edge beneath it. Old pain sharpened into a weapon. "You have information I need. You were inside their house, inside their confidence. You know things that could help me prove what they've done, not just to you, but to all the women before you. So I'm useful to you. Extremely." He didn't pretend otherwise. "And I'm useful to you. Together, we can bring them down. Apart, we'll both fail." Jessamy looked back toward the distant glow of Pemberton House, then at the darkness ahead, then at the man offering her a devil's bargain. "If I come with you," she said slowly, "what exactly are you proposing?" "Tonight, shelter and safety. Tomorrow we begin building a case against the Pembertons. You tell me everything you know, everything you saw, every detail that seemed insignificant. I provide resources, investigators, legal protection." "And the name you mentioned? Your name?" Theron was quiet for a moment. "If it becomes necessary for your protection, I'm prepared to offer marriage, a strategic alliance, nothing more. It would make you untouchable, the Duchess of Ashworth, beyond any accusation Aldrich could level against you." "Duchess." The word hung in the air between them. Jessamy almost laughed. An hour ago, she'd been engaged to a viscount's son. Now a duke was proposing a marriage of convenience on a dark country road. "You don't know me," she said. "I could be lying about everything. I could be working with the Pembertons." "You could be." Theron tilted his head slightly. "But you're not. I've had people watching that house for months. I know what Aldrich is. And I know the look of a woman who's just realized the man she trusted planned to destroy her. Jessamy's throat tightened. She hated how accurately he'd read her, hated feeling so exposed before a stranger. I want your word, she said, that if I help you, you'll pursue justice for the other women, not just revenge against the family, justice for everyone they've harmed. Something shifted in Theron's expression, surprise perhaps, or reassessment. You're negotiating terms while standing alone in the dark with no alternatives. I'm negotiating because I won't be anyone's weapon without knowing what I'm fighting for. Jessamy held his gaze. Do I have your word? The silence stretched. Then Theron Vane extended his hand again. You have my word. Justice for all of them. This time, Jessamy took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, steadying. Then I accept your offer, Your Grace. Good. He released her hand and stepped aside, gesturing toward the open carriage door. Welcome to the war, Miss Thorne. We have a great deal of work ahead. The carriage moved swiftly through the night, and Jessamy watched the darkness slip past the window, her mind racing faster than the horses. She had left Pemberton House with nothing but a satchel and her wits. Now she sat in a duke's carriage, wrapped in a blanket his driver had provided, traveling toward an estate she'd never seen to begin a war she didn't fully understand. Theron sat across from her, his face half-shadowed, reviewing papers from a leather case. He'd given her space since they departed, asking no questions, allowing her time to collect herself. It was a kindness she hadn't expected. The other women, she said finally, breaking the silence. The four before me. What happened to them? Theron looked up. The first was named Lydia Crestwood. Married Aldrich's older brother 8 years ago. Died 6 months later. Officially, a fall from her horse. Unofficially, there were witnesses who said she was pushed. Jessamy's stomach turned. And her fortune? Absorbed into the Pemberton estate within the month. The second? Marguerite Hastings, engaged to Aldrich himself, 4 years ago. Committed to Thornhaven Asylum 1 week before the wedding. Diagnosed with severe hysteria. She died there 18 months later. Theron's voice was flat, recounting horrors like ledger entries. Her inheritance, substantial property in Cornwall, was claimed by the Pembertons as compensation for medical expenses and breach of engagement. The third? Rosalind Whitmore. Vanished 3 years ago, 2 days after her engagement to Aldrich was announced. No body was ever found. Her family believes she ran away. I believe otherwise. And the fourth? Katrin Ashby, currently in Thornhaven, committed 18 months ago after a sudden onset of madness, according to the Pembertons' physician. Theron closed his case. I've been trying to get her released. The asylum refuses all visitors. Her family has been told she's too dangerous to see. Jessamy thought of the commitment papers in her satchel, her own name written in that careful script. She could have been the fifth woman locked away, screaming the truth to walls that would never believe her. How did you learn all this? Patience. Money. A network of people who owe me favors or share my hatred of the Pemberton family. Theron's eyes met hers. I've been building this case for years, Miss Thorne, but I've never had a witness who escaped before the trap closed. You're the first. The carriage crested a hill, and Ashworth Hall came into view. Jessamy had expected grandeur. She hadn't expected a fortress. Gray stone walls rose against the pre-dawn sky, towers at each corner, windows narrow as archers' slits. The main building sprawled across the hilltop, surrounded by grounds that stretched to the horizon. Everything about it spoke of age, power, and absolute impregnability. It's magnificent, she breathed. It's defensible. Theron's voice carried a grim satisfaction. Built during the Civil War by an ancestor who trusted no one, the walls have never been breached. He looked at her. Neither will you be, as long as you're under this roof. The carriage passed through iron gates and into a courtyard where staff already assembled despite the early hour. Footmen, maids, a stern-faced woman in black who must be the housekeeper, all watching as Jessamy descended from the carriage. She straightened her spine, remembering every lesson her mother had taught her about bearing and composure. She might be arriving in yesterday's gown with nothing but a satchel, but she would not appear defeated. "Mrs. Halston," Theron addressed the housekeeper, "this is Miss Jessamy Thorne. She'll be staying indefinitely. She requires rooms in the East Wing, a lady's maid, and complete discretion from all staff. No one outside this household is to know she's here. Is that clear?" "Perfectly, Your Grace." Mrs. Halston's sharp eyes assessed Jessamy without judgment, taking in the travel-worn cloak, the shadows beneath her eyes, the determined set of her jaw. "Welcome to Ashworth, Miss Thorne. I'll see to your comfort personally." "Thank you, Mrs. Halston." The housekeeper led Jessamy through corridors of dark wood and stone, past portraits of ancestors who watched with painted suspicion, up a grand staircase to the East Wing. The rooms she entered were larger than her entire childhood home: a sitting room with a fireplace already blazing, a bedroom with a four-poster bed, a dressing room, a private bath. "The Duke has instructed me to have a seamstress call tomorrow," Mrs. Halston said, moving efficiently through the space. "You'll need appropriate clothing. He's also arranged for tutors, etiquette, and household management. Everything required for your new position." "My new position?" Mrs. Halston paused at the door. "The Duke does not make impulsive decisions, Miss Thorne. If he's brought you here, he has a plan, and that plan requires you to become someone the Pembertons cannot dismiss or destroy." Her expression softened slightly. "Rest now. Tomorrow, your transformation begins." After the door closed, Jessamy sank onto the edge of the bed. 24 hours ago, she'd been preparing for her engagement ball, believing she'd found security and, perhaps, even love. Now she sat in a duke's fortress, preparing for a war against the family that had planned to steal everything from her. She thought of Aldrich's face when she'd returned his ring, the flash of something dark beneath his charming exterior. He would come for her, she knew. Once he learned she'd survived, once he realized what she might reveal, he would not rest until she was silenced. But he thought she was alone. He thought she was powerless. He didn't know about Ashworth Hall. He didn't know about Theron Vane. He didn't know that the woman he'd planned to destroy had just become his most dangerous enemy. Jessamy closed her eyes and let herself feel, just for a moment, the weight of everything she'd escaped and everything that lay ahead. Then she opened them, stood, and began to prepare. The war was just beginning. 3 weeks transformed Jessamy in ways she hadn't thought possible. She learned which fork to use for oysters, how to address a marchioness versus a countess, which topics were suitable for drawing rooms and which would end her social existence before it began. She learned the history of Ashworth Hall, the political alliances Theron had built, the enemies he'd cultivated in his 15-year campaign against the Pembertons, and she learned about the man himself. Theron was exacting, demanding, and utterly without patience for excuses. He drilled her on names and faces until she could identify every member of Parliament who owed debts to the Pemberton family. He made her recite the details of the commitment papers until she could testify without hesitation. He pushed her until she wanted to scream, then pushed harder. But he was also fair. When she mastered a skill, he acknowledged it. When she made mistakes, he corrected without cruelty. And every evening they dined together in the small study rather than the formal dining room, discussing strategy like equals rather than duke and dependent. It was during one of these dinners that Jessamy finally asked the question she'd been holding back. "The business deal that destroyed your family," she said, setting down her wine glass. "What exactly happened?" Theron was quiet for a long moment. The firelight carved shadows across his face, making him look older, more worn. "My father trusted Lord Pemberton," he said finally. They'd been friends since university. When Pemberton proposed a joint investment in shipping routes to the Americas, my father committed everything we had. His voice remained even, but Jessamy heard the old wound beneath. The investment was fraudulent. Pemberton had already extracted the capital and hidden it in shell companies. When the scheme collapsed, my father was blamed. He lost everything: the estate, the investments, and his reputation. And your mother's inheritance? Legally seized to cover the debts Pemberton had manufactured. Theron's jaw tightened. She died 2 years later. The physicians called it a fever. I call it a broken heart. Jessamy thought of her own mother, gone these 5 years, and the hollow space that loss had carved in her chest. How old were you? 19. Old enough to understand exactly what had been done to us. Young enough to be powerless to stop it. He looked at her across the table. I swore then that I would spend my life dismantling everything the Pembertons had built. Every alliance, every fortune, every scrap of respectability they'd stolen from families like mine. And now? Now I have the resources, the connections, and the evidence. His gaze held hers. What I lacked was a witness who'd seen inside their current operations. Someone who could prove they haven't changed, that Aldrich is continuing his father's legacy of destruction. Someone like me. Exactly like you. Jessamy absorbed this. She'd known she was useful to him, but hearing the full scope of his vendetta made her understand the weight of what she'd agreed to carry. I want to see the evidence you've gathered, she said. All of it. If I'm going to testify against them, I need to understand the complete picture. Something flickered in Theron's expression. Approval, perhaps, or reassessment. Most people in your position would prefer to know as little as possible. Plausible deniability. I'm not most people. Jessamy held his gaze, and I've learned that ignorance isn't protection, it's just a different kind of trap. Theron studied her for a long moment. Then he stood, crossing to a cabinet she'd never seen him open. He withdrew a leather case thick with documents and placed it on the table between them. Everything I have, he said. Financial records, witness statements, physician's notes from Thornhaven, correspondence between Pemberton and his solicitors. He opened the case, revealing stacks of papers covered in meticulous notation. Some of it is damning. Most of it is circumstantial. None of it is enough to convict them in court. Jessamy pulled the case toward her, scanning the first documents. Names jumped out at her. Lydia Crestwood, Marguerite Hastings, Rosalind Whitmore, Katrin Ashby, the women before her, the women who hadn't escaped. What would be enough? Direct testimony from someone inside their operation, documentary evidence of their methods, or... Theron paused. A confession. You think Aldrich would confess? I think Aldrich is arrogant enough to boast about his conquests to the right audience. Theron's smile was cold. The question is how to create that audience without alerting him to the trap. Jessamy looked at the documents, then at the man who'd spent 15 years building toward this moment. I have an idea, she said slowly, but you're not going to like it. Tell me anyway. Aldrich believes I fled because I was overwhelmed, hysterical, unstable. She met Theron's eyes. What if I let him believe he was right? What if I appeared somewhere public, visibly fragile, and let him think he could finish what he started? Absolutely not. Theron's voice was sharp. You'd be putting yourself directly in his path. I'd be putting myself where he'd feel confident enough to make a mistake. Jessamy leaned forward. You said yourself that circumstantial evidence isn't enough. We need him to act, to reveal himself. He won't do that if he thinks I'm protected. He'll only move if he thinks I'm vulnerable. And if he moves faster than we anticipate? If he harms you before we can intervene? Then you'll have your evidence, won't you? The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Theron's expression was unreadable, but Jessamy saw his hands clench against the table's edge. I won't use you as bait, he said finally. I made you a promise. Justice for all of them. That includes keeping you safe. And I'm telling you that safety won't win this war. Jessamy stood, placing her palms flat on the table. I walked away from Aldrich once. I can face him again. The question is whether you trust me enough to let me fight. Theron rose slowly, moving around the table until he stood close enough that she could see the conflict in his eyes. "I trust you," he said quietly. "That's precisely why this terrifies me." It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to her. And in that moment, Jessamy realized that somewhere between strategy sessions and dining room debates, this had become more than an alliance. She didn't have words for what it was becoming, but she knew it had changed everything. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Lady Marin Ashworth, Theron's aunt and the only family he acknowledged, was hosting a winter ball at her London townhouse. It would be a small affair by society standards, perhaps 60 guests, but the guest list included 3 families who had invested with the Pembertons and 2 journalists known for investigating financial scandals. "You'll attend as my companion," Theron explained, reviewing the invitation over breakfast. "Not as the Duchess of Ashworth, not yet. Simply as Miss Jessamy Thorne, a distant connection staying at the hall while her family's estate is being settled." "Won't people ask questions?" "People always ask questions. The key is controlling which questions they ask." He set down the invitation. "My aunt knows the truth. She's been waiting 15 years to see the Pembertons destroyed. She'll protect you as fiercely as I would." The ball was 5 days away. Jessamy spent every moment preparing, memorizing names, rehearsing conversations, practicing the delicate art of implying scandal without making accusations. Mrs. Halston supervised her wardrobe selection, ultimately choosing a gown of deep sapphire silk that made Jessamy look elegant, confident, and utterly unlike the fragile creature Aldrich would expect. The night of the ball, Jessamy stood before the mirror in her dressing room, barely recognizing herself. The gown fit perfectly. Pearls gleamed at her throat, borrowed from Lady Marin's collection. Her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate style that had taken her maid 2 hours to complete. She looked like someone who belonged in ballrooms and drawing rooms. She looked like someone who couldn't be easily dismissed. A knock at the door. "Come in." Theron entered, dressed in formal black and white, and stopped when he saw her. For a moment, his careful composure slipped, revealing something raw and unguarded. "You look—" He seemed to search for the appropriate word. "Formidable. Is that a compliment?" "It's the truth." He crossed to her, adjusting a pearl that had shifted slightly. His fingers brushed her neck, warm against her skin. "Are you ready?" "No." Jessamy met his eyes in the mirror. "But I'll do it anyway." "That's all any of us can do." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" Lady Marin Ashworth was a force of nature in crimson silk, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She greeted Jessamy with a kiss on each cheek and a whispered warning. "The Cavendish sisters gossip like fishwives. Lord Sterling is drunk by 9 every evening, and Lady Pemberton's cousin is here tonight. Watch yourself." "Lady Pemberton has a cousin?" "Honoria Blackwood. She reports everything back to the family." Lady Marin squeezed Jessamy's hands. "But don't let that frighten you, dear. Let her report. Let them wonder." The ballroom was a swirl of candlelight and conversation. Jessamy moved through it on Theron's arm, meeting faces she'd memorized from drawings, names she'd rehearsed until they felt natural. She smiled, she chatted, and she deflected questions about her background with practiced ease. And she planted seeds. "Lord Pemberton's investment firm?" she said to Lady Cavendish, feigning innocent curiosity. "I've heard such varied opinions. My late father always said one should thoroughly investigate before committing funds to anyone. The shipping routes to the Americas do seem rather volatile lately," she observed to Mr. Hartwell, a banker with connections to 3 Pemberton investors. "I wonder if the projected returns are truly sustainable." "Thornhaven Asylum?" she murmured to Mrs. Wellesley, whose daughter had nearly been sent there years ago. "What a dreadful place. I've heard stories that would curdle milk." Each comment was careful, deniable, designed to raise questions without making accusations. By the time supper was announced, Jessamy had spoken to 24 guests and left every one of them with a faint unease about the Pemberton name. She found Theron near the terrace doors, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're a natural," he said quietly. "I'm terrified. You don't show it." He handed her a glass of champagne. "Lady Cavendish is already asking questions about her husband's investments, and Mr. Hartwell mentioned requesting an audit of his accounts. Is that enough?" "It's a beginning." Theron touched his glass to hers, to first victories. They drank, and for a moment, standing in the glittering ballroom surrounded by people who might become allies or enemies, Jessamy felt something she hadn't experienced since before Aldrich: hope. Then she saw Honoria Blackwood watching her from across the room, and the hope curdled into warning. The Pembertons would know about her soon. They would know she'd survived, that she'd found protection, that she was speaking against them in society's most influential circles. The real battle was about to begin. The invitation arrived 3 days after Lady Marin's ball. Lord and Lady Whitmore requested the pleasure of Miss Jessamy Thorne's company at a weekend gathering at Chelworth Manor. The gathering would celebrate the winter solstice and include distinguished guests from London's most prominent families, including, the invitation noted with poisonous courtesy, Lord Aldrich Pemberton and his parents. Jessamy read the invitation twice, her hand still despite the churning in her stomach. The Whitmores, Rosalind Whitmore's family? The same. Theron's voice was grim. Rosalind was their only daughter. She vanished 3 years ago, and they've never stopped searching. He took the invitation from her hand. "This is a trap, but not for you. Lady Whitmore suspects the Pembertons were involved in Rosalind's disappearance. She's been trying to gather evidence ever since. And she thinks I can help. She knows you escaped what Rosalind didn't." Theron set the invitation on his desk. "The question is whether attending is worth the risk. Aldrich will be there. He'll see you. The pretense of anonymity ends the moment you walk through those doors." Jessamy moved to the window, looking out at the frost-covered grounds of Ashworth Hall. She thought of the commitment papers tucked safely in her traveling case, her name written in that careful script, evidence she would carry until the moment it could destroy him. She thought of Lydia, Marguerite, Rosalind, Catherine, women who'd trusted the wrong man and paid with their lives, their freedom, and their sanity. If Lady Whitmore is gathering evidence," she said slowly, "then we have a potential ally inside the Pemberton circle, someone with personal motivation to see them destroyed. We also have someone who might be compromised, someone the Pembertons are watching. Then we give them something to watch." Jessamy turned to face Theron. "I've been hiding here for weeks, preparing for a confrontation that keeps getting delayed. But hiding doesn't win wars. You told me that yourself. I also told you I wouldn't use you as bait. You're not using me. I'm choosing this." She crossed to him, standing close enough to see the tension in his jaw. "Aldrich believes I'm weak because I walked away. He believes I'm alone because I had nowhere to go. Let him see that he was wrong on both counts. And if he tries to harm you? Then we'll have witnesses. Lady Whitmore, her guests, anyone watching." Jessamy held his gaze. "I won't cower in a fortress while he destroys more women. I walked away from him once. Now I'm going to walk toward him, and I'm going to make him regret every choice he's ever made." Theron was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "We go together," he said. "I'll accept an invitation as well. Lady Whitmore will understand. As my escort? As your protection." His hand found hers, gripping firmly. "And as the man who'll destroy Aldrich Pemberton if he so much as looks at you wrong." The words sent heat through Jessamy's chest, something fierce and protective that had nothing to do with strategy. "Theron, don't." His voice roughened. "Don't thank me for doing what I should have done years ago. If I'd moved faster, if I'd found evidence sooner, Rosalind might still be alive. Catherine might be free. You might never have been in danger at all. You can't blame yourself for their crimes. I can blame myself for not stopping them sooner. He released her hand, stepping back. This ends at Chelworth. One way or another. Lady Whitmore received them in her private sitting room before the other guests arrived. She was a woman in her 50s with grief carved into the lines around her eyes, but steel in her spine. I've been pursuing leads for 3 years, she said, pouring tea with hands that trembled slightly. Dismissed servants, former groundskeepers, anyone who might have seen something. Most have been too frightened to speak. But fear fades when powerful families fall. You believe Rosalind was murdered? Jessamy said quietly. I know she was. Lady Whitmore set down the teapot. My daughter would never have left willingly. She was planning her wedding, writing letters to her friends, excited about her future. And then she simply vanished, and the Pembertons told everyone she'd had a breakdown. We'll find the truth, Theron promised, whatever it takes. 3 days later, Jessamy sat in Theron's carriage, watching the countryside give way to the manicured grounds of Chelworth Manor. Her stomach was a knot of anticipation and dread, but her spine was straight, her hands were still, and her resolve was iron. Aldrich Pemberton thought she was broken, disappeared, or destroyed. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Chelworth Manor buzzed with activity as guests arrived for the solstice gathering. Jessamy counted at least 30 carriages in the drive, each depositing elegantly dressed lords and ladies who streamed into the great hall like silk-clad rivers. Lady Whitmore greeted them personally, clasping Jessamy's hands with desperate warmth. The Pembertons arrive within the hour, she whispered. Whatever you need, whatever support I can provide, you have it. Theron guided Jessamy through the manor's corridors to their adjoining suites. The rooms were comfortable, tastefully appointed, with windows overlooking the frosted gardens where guests already mingled. Stay visible, Theron instructed, checking the window latches with practiced efficiency. Engage with other guests, build alliances, but don't confront Aldrich directly until I'm beside you. And if he confronts me first, then you remember what you are. Theron turned to face her. Not a victim, not prey, a woman who walked away from him and found something better. The first evening's dinner was an elaborate affair, 40 guests arranged around a table that glittered with crystal and candlelight. Jessamy was seated between Lord Hartwell and an elderly baroness who spent most of the meal discussing her cats. She didn't see Aldrich. His parents were present. Lord and Lady Pemberton holding court at the far end of the table, all smiles and practiced charm. But Aldrich's seat remained empty throughout the first course, then the second. Young Pemberton sends his regrets, Lady Whitmore announced to the table. He's been delayed, but will join us tomorrow. Jessamy felt Theron's gaze from across the table. A warning. Stay alert. The delay means nothing. After dinner, the guests dispersed to the drawing room for cards and conversation. Jessamy circulated, continuing the work she'd begun at Lady Marin's ball. A question here, an observation there, each comment designed to raise doubts about the Pemberton family's sterling reputation. She was discussing investment strategies with Mrs. Hartwell when the drawing room doors opened. Aldrich Pemberton walked in. He looked exactly as she remembered. Golden-haired, blue-eyed, and handsome in the way that concealed cruelty behind charm. He wore confidence like a second skin, greeting guests with easy smiles and warm handshakes. Then his eyes found Jessamy. The color drained from his face. His smile froze. For one perfect moment she watched him realize that the woman he'd planned to destroy was standing in the same room, very much alive, and watching him with unwavering eyes. Jessamy didn't look away. She held his gaze across the crowded room, letting him see that she wasn't frightened, wasn't broken, wasn't the fragile creature he'd expected her to become. Then she turned back to Mrs. Hartwell and continued her conversation as if nothing had happened. She felt him approaching before she heard his footsteps. Miss Thorne. Aldrich's voice was smooth, but she heard the edge beneath. What an unexpected pleasure. Jessamy turned, composing her features into polite neutrality. Lord Pemberton, I didn't realize you were acquainted with the Whitmores. Old family friends. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I might say the same about you. Last I heard, you'd left our engagement party rather abruptly. I found the atmosphere stifling. I needed air. For 3 weeks? Fresh air is remarkably restorative. Jessamy kept her voice light, aware of the guests nearby, the witnesses to this exchange. I feel quite recovered now. Do you? Aldrich stepped closer, lowering his voice. Because I heard you'd taken refuge with the Duke of Ashworth. Curious choice, considering his family's history with mine. His Grace has been a generous host. His Grace is using you. The charm stripped away, revealing something cold and calculating. Whatever he's promised you, whatever revenge he's planning, you're nothing but a weapon to him. When he's finished, he'll discard you just like you planned to? Jessamy cut him off, her voice barely above a whisper. I found the commitment papers, Aldrich. I know exactly what you intended. For a moment, his composure cracked entirely. She saw the predator beneath, the man who'd planned to steal her fortune and lock her away to die forgotten. Then he smiled, and the charm resurfaced. I don't know what you think you found, he said softly, but making accusations without proof is dangerous. People might think you're unstable. People might think many things. Jessamy held her ground. But I wonder what they'll think when they learn about Lydia, Marguerite, Rosalind, and Katrine. 4 women before me. 4 fortunes absorbed into your family. 4 lives destroyed. Aldrich's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? She leaned closer, matching his whisper. I'm not alone anymore, Aldrich. And I'm not afraid. So whatever you're planning, whatever you think you can do to silence me, know this. I walked away from you once. I can destroy you just as easily. She turned and walked away before he could respond, her heart pounding, her hands trembling beneath her silk gloves. Theron intercepted her near the terrace doors. What happened? He knows. Jessamy's voice was even despite the adrenaline coursing through her. He knows I found the papers, and he knows I'm not alone. Good. Theron's eyes glittered. Let him be afraid for once. Let him understand what it feels like to be hunted. The next 2 days were a careful dance of observation and maneuvering. Jessamy watched Aldrich watching her. She saw him conferring with his parents in shadowed corners, saw the calculating glances Lady Pemberton cast in her direction, saw the way servants who should have been neutral suddenly seemed to be everywhere she went. They were planning something. She could feel it like a storm building on the horizon. On the second evening, Jessamy received a letter. It had been slipped under her door sometime during dinner, a plain envelope with no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper bore a message that turned her blood to ice. Your sister Marjorie is lovely. 17, isn't she? Studying at Harrington Academy for Young Ladies in Bath. The same academy, coincidentally, where Katrin Ashby was enrolled before her unfortunate breakdown. Accusations have consequences, Miss Thorne. Consider carefully whether your vendetta is worth your sister's sanity. Jessamy's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the letter. Marjorie, her baby sister, the only family she had left, the girl she'd been protecting since their parents died. Aldrich knew where she was. Aldrich had influence at the same academy that had delivered Katrin to Thornhaven Asylum. She was across the room and out the door before conscious thought caught up with her, searching for Theron, desperate to find him before the panic consumed her completely. She found him in the library, reviewing documents with Lord Hartwell. One look at her face and he was on his feet, excusing himself with barely concealed urgency. What happened? Jessamy thrust the letter into his hands. She watched him read it, watched the color drain from his face, watched his expression transform from concern to cold, absolute fury. Where is your sister now? Bath, Harrington Academy. Jessamy's voice cracked. Theron, if they take her, if they do to her what they did to Katrin, they won't. His hands gripped her shoulders, steadying her. Listen to me. I have people in Bath, trusted people. I'll send word tonight. Your sister will be removed from that academy and brought to Ashworth before dawn. How can you be certain? Because I've been preparing for this possibility since the moment you told me about her. Theron's voice was fierce. I have guards watching the academy. I have a carriage waiting 2 streets away. Your sister has been protected since the day you agreed to help me. The relief hit Jessamy so hard her knees buckled. Theron caught her, pulling her against his chest, holding her while the terror drained away. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you to worry. And because... He paused, his arms tightening around her. Because protecting what you love has become more important to me than any strategy. Jessamy pulled back enough to see his face. Theron. I know this wasn't supposed to be real. His voice was rough, stripped of its usual control. I know we agreed this was alliance, strategy, mutual benefit. But somewhere between finding you on that road and watching you stand up to Aldrich tonight, it stopped being about revenge. What is it about now? You. The word was simple, devastating. It's about you, about making sure you're safe, that you're happy, that no one ever hurts you again. He cupped her face in his hands. I didn't plan to feel this way. I don't know if you want me to feel this way, but I can't pretend anymore that you're just a weapon in my war. Jessamy's heart was pounding, but not with fear. Not anymore. I'm not pretending either, she whispered. I haven't been for weeks. Theron's breath caught. Jessamy. She kissed him. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was fierce, desperate, the release of weeks of tension and growing feeling. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer. Her fingers gripped his coat, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. When they finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, Jessamy laughed. That wasn't very strategic. No. Theron's smile was the most genuine she'd ever seen. But it was necessary. A knock at the library door shattered the moment. A servant's voice, urgent. Your Grace, there's been a development. Lady Whitmore needs you both immediately. They found Lady Whitmore in her private sitting room, clutching a letter of her own. It's from Thornhaven, she said, her voice shaking. Katrin Ashby. She's dying. The asylum claims it's consumption, but a nurse who works there sent me this. She handed Theron a second, smaller note. They're killing her. Slowly, deliberately, to ensure she never talks. Jessamy read over Theron's shoulder. The nurse's message was clear. Katrin had been given something that was destroying her from the inside. If she wasn't removed within the week, she would be dead. We have to get her out, Jessamy said. The asylum won't release her without family consent, and her family believes she's genuinely mad. Lady Whitmore's face crumpled. I've tried for 18 months. Every legal avenue is blocked. Theron's expression hardened into something dangerous. Then we don't use legal avenues. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that Thornhaven has needed new investment for years, and I'm suggesting that the Duke of Ashworth has enough money to buy cooperation, or enough influence to destroy anyone who refuses. He looked at Jessamy. If we can get Katrin out, get her testimony, we'll have direct evidence of what the Pembertons do to women who threaten them. And if we fail? Then we've shown our hand and lost the element of surprise. Theron's jaw set. But leaving her to die isn't an option. Not anymore. Lady Whitmore stood, her grief transforming into determination. Tell me what you need. Money, connections, whatever it takes. I want the family who destroyed my daughter to pay for every life they've stolen. That night, while the other guests slept, 3 conspirators planned a rescue. And in a dark corner of Chelworth Manor, Aldrich Pemberton watched and wondered why his enemies seemed so confident. He would find out soon enough. 3 days later, everything changed. Katrin Ashby arrived at Chelworth Manor in the dead of night, smuggled from Thornhaven by a physician Theron had bribed and a carriage that bore no crest. She was thin, pale, and terrified, but she was alive, and she was ready to talk. They made me sign papers, she whispered, clutching Jessamy's hand. Confession of debts I never owed. Permission for treatments that left me unable to think clearly. I don't remember most of the last 18 months. Just fragments. Needles. Bitter medicine. voices telling me I was mad. "You're not mad," Jessamy said firmly. "You never were. I know that now." Katrin's eyes found Theron's across the room. "Your Grace. I remember everything Aldrich said to me before I was taken. He laughed about what he'd done to Lydia, how easy it was to make her death look like an accident. He told me I should have been grateful he was only sending me to an asylum instead of a grave." Theron leaned forward. "Would you testify to this publicly?" "I'll testify to anyone who will listen." Lady Whitmore had arranged a solstice ball for the final night of the house party. Every guest would attend. Every influential family in 3 counties would be present. And Lord and Lady Pemberton, along with their son, would be walking into a trap of their own making. The ballroom blazed with candlelight as guests assembled. Jessamy wore crimson silk, a deliberate choice. The color of blood, of courage, of warning. Theron stood beside her in formal black, his hand resting lightly on her back. "Are you ready?" he murmured. "I've been ready since I walked away from him." Lady Whitmore stood at the head of the room, commanding attention with a single raised hand. "Distinguished guests," she began, "thank you for joining us this solstice evening. Before the dancing begins, I have an announcement that cannot wait." The Pembertons stood near the entrance, glasses of champagne in hand, still smiling their practiced smiles. Aldrich caught Jessamy's eye and raised his glass in mocking toast. His arrogance would be his undoing. Many of you knew my daughter Rosalind," Lady Whitmore continued, her voice unwavering despite the emotion beneath. 3 years ago, she vanished shortly after becoming engaged to Lord Aldrich Pemberton. We were told she ran away. We were told she was unstable, overwhelmed by the prospect of marriage. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. We were lied to. Lady Whitmore gestured, and a servant opened a side door. Katrin Ashby entered, supported by a nurse, frail but determined. Gasps erupted from the assembled guests. "This is Miss Katrin Ashby," Lady Whitmore announced. 18 months ago, she was committed to Thornhaven Asylum at the request of the Pemberton family, diagnosed with hysteria, declared legally incompetent, left to die. "This is outrageous." Lord Pemberton stepped forward, his face purple with rage. "This woman is a lunatic, escaped from proper care. Whatever she's told you is the raving of a diseased mind." "Is it?" Lady Whitmore's voice cut like ice. "Then perhaps you can explain why she bears needle marks on her arms from experimental treatments. Perhaps you can explain why the physician who committed her was paid directly from Pemberton accounts. Perhaps you can explain why 4 other women connected to your son have met similar fates." The ballroom had gone silent. Every eye was on the Pembertons. Jessamy stepped forward. "My name is Jessamy Thorne," she said, her voice carrying across the room. 2 months ago, I was engaged to Lord Aldrich Pemberton. The night of our engagement ball, I discovered documents in his study. Commitment papers bearing my name, signed by physicians I'd never met, preparing to have me declared insane so he could claim my inheritance. "Lies!" Aldrich shouted. "She's delusional, just like the others." "Am I?" Jessamy reached into her reticule and withdrew folded papers. "Then perhaps you can explain these. The original commitment documents from your study. Signed, sealed, dated before I ever agreed to marry you." She handed them to Lord Hartwell, the banker, who examined them with widening eyes. "These are authentic," he said slowly. "The physician's signature, the asylum seal. Good God, this was premeditated." "Forgeries!" Lady Pemberton shrieked. "This woman is a fortune hunter who—" "I have testimony from servants in your London household," Theron interrupted, stepping forward. "I have financial records showing irregular transfers from the estates of 5 different women, all of whom were connected to your son. I have a dying woman's statement detailing exactly what Aldrich told her before she was committed." His voice was cold as winter steel. "And I have a nurse from Thornhaven willing to testify that the Pemberton family paid to have Katrine Ashby poisoned." The room erupted. Guests backed away from the Pembertons as if they carried plague. Lord Hartwell was already conferring with 2 other gentlemen, their faces grave. Lady Whitmore stood watching with tears streaming down her cheeks. This is conspiracy. Aldrich's pretense had collapsed completely. Ashworth has hated us for years. He's manufactured all of this to destroy— You destroyed yourself. Jessamy cut him off. The moment you thought you could treat women like disposable assets. The moment you murdered Lydia and locked away Marguerite and made Rosalind disappear. We just ensured the world would see what you really are. You can't prove, Rosalind. Can't I? Lady Whitmore's voice was terrible in its grief. Because I received a letter yesterday from a groundskeeper at your northern estate, the one you dismissed last spring. He saw a grave being dug in the woods 3 years ago. He saw who was buried there. All color drained from Aldrich's face. She was my daughter, Lady Whitmore screamed. You murdered my child, and you let us believe she abandoned us. Lord Pemberton made a break for the doors, only to find them blocked by footmen. 2 of Lady Whitmore's men seized him before he reached the terrace. Lady Pemberton collapsed against a pillar, all pretense of composure gone, and a magistrate's man took her arm before she could flee. And Aldrich stood frozen, surrounded by the guests he'd once charmed, watching his world crumble as guards closed in around him. The family that had destroyed so many would finally face justice together. The magistrate has been summoned, Theron said quietly. He'll arrive within the hour. I suggest you use the time to make your peace with God. You'll be meeting him soon enough. Jessamy watched them lead Aldrich away, watched the guests surge around Lady Whitmore offering support, watched Katrin weep with relief in the nurse's arms. It was over. After everything, after the cold road and the desperate bargain and the weeks of preparation, it was finally over. Theron's hand found hers. You did it, he said. We did it. She leaned into him, exhaustion and triumph washing through her in equal measure. Justice for all of them. Justice, he agreed, and for the first time since she'd known him, he smiled without reservation. And something more, I hope. 6 months later, Jessamy stood at the window of Ashworth Hall, watching spring sunlight transform the grounds into a tapestry of green and gold. So much had changed since that winter night when she'd walked away from her engagement in silence. The Pembertons were destroyed. Lord Pemberton had died in prison awaiting trial, his heart giving out under the weight of his crimes. Lady Pemberton had fled to the continent after posting bail, where she lived in obscurity on whatever funds she'd managed to hide. And Aldrich had been convicted of 4 counts of fraud, 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder, and 3 counts of unlawful imprisonment. He would spend the rest of his life in a cell smaller than the asylum rooms where he'd condemned his victims. Rosalind Whitmore's remains had been recovered from the northern estate and laid to rest properly. Lady Whitmore had wept at the funeral, but she'd also smiled, knowing her daughter's murder had finally been acknowledged. Katrin Ashby was recovering at Ashworth Hall, growing stronger every day under the care of physicians who actually wanted her well. And Jessamy Thorne had become the Duchess of Ashworth. The wedding had been small, private, witnessed only by Lady Murren, Lady Whitmore, Marjorie, and the household staff who'd become family. No grand ceremony, no society spectacle. Just 2 people who'd found something real in the midst of strategy and revenge. You're thinking again. Theron's voice came from behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. I can hear it from across the room. I'm thinking about how different everything is. Jessamy covered his hands with hers. 6 months ago, I was walking down a dark road with nothing but a satchel and my wits. Now you're a duchess with a satchel and your wits. She heard the smile in his voice. Some things don't change. Jessamy turned in his arms, facing him. Do you ever regret it? The way we started? The bargain? The strategy? Using each other? I regret nothing. Theron cupped her face in his hands. Everything that happened brought us here. And here is exactly where I want to be. Even though I'm stubborn and opinionated and refuse to let you make decisions without consulting me, especially because of that, he kissed her forehead. I spent 15 years planning alone, Having a partner, a true partner, is worth more than any revenge. A knock interrupted them. A maid entered with a letter. From Lady Whitmore, Your Grace. She says it's urgent. Jessamy opened the letter, reading quickly. Her eyes widened. There are more women, she said. Lady Whitmore has been investigating other families, other men who use the same methods as the Pembertons. She's found at least 12 cases across England where women have been committed to asylums or disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Theron read over her shoulder. She wants to establish a formal inquiry. She wants to do more than that. Jessamy looked up at him. She wants to create a refuge, a place where women who've escaped can recover, rebuild, testify against their abusers. She wants us to help. For a moment, Theron was silent. Then he smiled. The same dangerous smile he'd worn the night he'd proposed their alliance. It seems our war isn't quite over. Are you disappointed? I'm delighted. He took her hand. I've found you on a dark road, walking away from everything you'd lost. You showed me that courage isn't about power. It's about choosing to fight even when you have nothing. He squeezed her fingers. These women deserve the same chance you had, the same chance we can give them. Jessamy thought of herself on that October night, alone, frightened, with nothing but determination keeping her upright. She thought of Katrine, still healing in the room down the hall. She thought of Rosalind, finally at peace. She thought of Marjorie, now safe at Ashworth, and beginning to laugh again. Then let's give it to them. That evening, they sat together in the study, drafting plans for what would become the Ashworth Women's Refuge. A place of safety, a place of recovery. A place where women who'd been discarded, destroyed, or dismissed could find their voices again. Outside, the sun set over the grounds of Ashworth Hall, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside, two people who'd started as strategists had become partners, lovers, and champions of those who had no one else. Jessamy Thorne had walked away from her broken engagement in silence, but she would never be silent again. Thank you for staying until the very end. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that walking away can be the bravest choice, if it showed you that finding the right person can change everything, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling us your favorite moment and where you're listening from. And if you're ready for another story where courage conquers cruelty and love rises from the ashes, subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss what comes next. You're the reason these stories exist. Thank you for being here, for listening, for believing that even when we walk away in silence, our voices can still change the world.